March 1944. Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas. Flames erupt from the No. 3 engine of Captain Robert Morgan's B-29. The right-hand R-3350 engine 2,200 horsepower of American engineering is cooking itself alive at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Black smoke pours from the cowling as mechanics sprint toward the aircraft with extinguishers. It's the fourth fire this week on this airfield alone. Morgan kills the fuel mixture. He hits the fire suppression button. Nothing. The CO2 bottles can't reach the source of the blaze. It's burning deep inside the rear cylinders, trapped behind metal baffles where no gas can reach. He shouts, "Everybody out!" 45 seconds later, his crew is clear. By the time the fire trucks arrive, the $600,000 bomber is melting into a puddle of aluminum. Another one gone, not to flak, not to fighters, but to its own engine. Across Kansas, the same thing is happening. At Smoky Hill, another B-29 burns on the runway. At Walker Field, 2 catch fire during run-ups. At Great Bend, 1 explodes during takeoff, killing all 11 aboard. 16 aircraft destroyed, 47 more crippled. Out of the first 175 built, a third have suffered catastrophic engine failures. The Superfortress, America's most expensive weapon, costing more than the Manhattan Project, is turning into a flying funeral pyre before it ever reaches Japan. General Henry Hap Arnold feels the pressure from Washington. He's promised the president that B-29 seconds will be bombing Tokyo by June, but at this rate, the program is killing more airmen in Kansas than the enemy is in combat. What no one can imagine, not Boeing's engineers, not Wright Aeronautical's brightest minds, not even NACA's top scientists, is that the man who will save this nightmare isn't a designer or an officer. He's a 38-year-old mechanic from Cleveland, Ohio, a plumber with a 7th-grade education. And while America's most powerful bombers burn, that plumber is about to propose something so simple, so absurd, that every engineer in the room will laugh until they realize it works. Cleveland, Ohio, winter of 1941. The war is still half a world away, but for Tony Validore, it's already personal. He's 35 years old, stocky, quiet, with the kind of hands that tell stories, knuckles cracked, palms calloused, nails always blackened from work. By day, Tony installs sinks and heating pipes across the neighborhoods of Little Italy. By night, he sits in his small kitchen, listening to the radio, hearing about B-17 seconds over Europe, Japanese advances across the Pacific, and wondering if there's any way he can help. Tony's not an engineer. He never finished the 8th grade. He knows nothing about flight, nothing about aerodynamics, but he knows flow. He learned it the hard way, crawling through damp basements, cutting through ancient plaster, figuring out how to make water move through houses that were never designed for plumbing. And he learned one lesson that no textbook ever taught him. You can't fight flow. You guide it. When the war ramps up, Tony answers a call for skilled tradesmen to join the aviation industry. He's too old for combat, but Curtiss Wright needs mechanics for new aircraft engines. So Tony trades his pipe wrench for a toolbox and reports to Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas. The airfield is chaos. Fresh recruits, untested aircraft, and row after row of the new B-29 Superfortress, the pride of American industry. Each one a miracle of metal and firepower, and each one hiding a fatal flaw inside its engines. Tony starts as a line mechanic, just another grease-stained worker checking oil filters and tightening bolts. He listens more than he speaks. He watches pilots come back from test flights shaken, their bombers trailing black smoke. He overhears the engineers arguing words like baffles, cowl flaps, ram, air pressure, but all Tony sees is heat. Heat that doesn't escape. Late one night, he studies an R-3350 engine under floodlights. Its twin rows of cylinders gleam like silver organ pipes. Front row bright and clean. Rear row scorched and warped. He doesn't know the equations. But he knows this sight from somewhere, a third-floor radiator that never gets warm, because the hot water takes the easier path through the second floor. It's the same problem, just louder. Tony mutters to himself, half laughing, "You boys don't need an engineer." you need a plumber. It's the spark of an idea, one that will soon pit a man with a wrench against the most brilliant engineers in America, and win. September 1944. Kansas nights are long, the kind that hang heavy with heat and the scent of burnt oil. Inside Hangar 12 at Pratt Army Airfield, a lone figure works beneath the harsh glow of floodlights. The roar of engines has gone silent for the night, except for the echo of one that almost burned. Tony Validore wipes his hands on a rag and studies the open cowling of an R3350. The rear cylinders are blackened, their cooling fins discolored like rusted coins. He runs a hand over the metal, rough, warped, dead from heat. The official report calls it thermal fatigue. Tony calls it what it is, bad flow. He traces the path that air is supposed to take in through the front intake, over the first row of cylinders, then back toward the rear. But what he sees doesn't make sense. There's nowhere for the air to go. It's trapped. The front row cooks the incoming air before it ever reaches the rear. It's like a blocked pipe, pressure building up with nowhere to escape. He remembers that old apartment job on Euclid Avenue, the third-floor radiators that stayed cold because hot water took the easy route to the second floor. The solution then had been simple. Add a bypass pipe, redirect the flow, give the water a clear path. He stares at the engine again. What if I just do the same thing here? It sounds ridiculous, even to him. These machines are the pinnacle of American engineering. Tested, analyzed, signed off by men with degrees. And yet, none of them can keep the rear cylinders alive for more than a few hours. Tony pulls a maintenance log from his pocket, flips it over, and begins sketching. Not equations, just lines. Arrows showing airflow, small ducts, routed around the front cylinders, forcing air directly to the back row. A simple bypass. He whispers, "Don't fight the air. Guide it." Over the next 3 nights, Tony works in secret. He scavenges aluminum tubing from a damaged B-29 awaiting salvage. He cuts and bends it by hand, forms crude ducts that look more like plumbing fixtures than aircraft parts. With tin snips, he cuts new openings in the cylinder baffles. With a borrowed torch, he seals the joints using high-temperature compound. The whole system is held together with screws, sealant, and stubborn hope. By the 3rd night, his creation is ready. The right inboard engine of B-29 serial number 42-2-44605 now carries his hidden modification invisible beneath the cowling. No one knows, no one approved it. And if the brass finds out, he's finished. October 3rd, 1944, test morning. Captain James Wheeler climbs into the cockpit for a scheduled engine run-up. Routine, nothing unusual. Tony stands a few yards away, heart pounding. Wheeler throttles up. The R3350 screams to life, the prop blades slicing the air like a saw. Tony watches the gauges from the ground crew station. He knows what's supposed to happen. Rear cylinder temperature spiking past 550 degrees within 90 seconds. But the needle doesn't climb. It holds steady. 425 degrees. 430. No higher. 5 minutes at full power. 10. Still steady. Wheeler frowns. Gauge must be busted, he mutters. He shuts the engine down and radios for inspection. When the mechanics remove the cowling, they freeze. Inside the polished engine bay are Tony's crude, hand-shaped aluminum pipes. Who installed these? Why are they there? And more importantly, why did they work? Within hours, Tony is pulled from the line and marched before Major Donald Peterson, the base's chief of maintenance. Peterson slams the report onto his desk. "Did you modify that engine without authorization?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand this could get you court-martialed?" Tony nods. "Yes, sir, but it ran 60 degrees cooler. I think I fixed the problem." The major stares at him, torn between fury and disbelief. "You fixed a problem Wright Aeronautical and NACA couldn't solve with plumbing parts?" Tony shrugs. "Air's a fluid, sir. Same rules apply." Peterson looks at the temperature logs again. 60 degrees cooler. Sustained. He exhales slowly. "All right, Mr. Plumber." Let's see if you can prove it wasn't just luck. What happens next will take Tony and his aluminum pipes straight into the heart of American aviation's biggest crisis, and the room where legends are made. October 5th, 1944, Dayton, Ohio. Wright Field, the beating heart of American military aviation. Tony Validore sits in the cargo bay of a C-47 transport, his hands resting on a canvas duffel bag filled with aluminum tubes, his homemade cooling ducts. They rattle softly as the plane descends through gray Ohio skies. He's not a passenger, he's cargo. Cargo with an idea no one believes in. When he steps off the plane, he's escorted straight into a conference room, polished wood table, 12 men in uniforms and suits, and enough gold braid to blind him. Wright Aeronautical, Boeing, NACA, the Army Air Forces. And at the head of the table, a man Tony recognizes from photographs, Colonel Curtis E. LeMay, commander of the B-29 program in the Pacific. LeMay is known for two things: perfection and fury. He doesn't tolerate excuses, and he doesn't tolerate failure. Today, the B-29 program is failing. Dr. Harrison Evans from Wright Aeronautical begins the meeting. Sergeant Validore, we've reviewed your temperature data. While the results are interesting, we have significant concerns about your approach. Tony nods. Yes, sir. Evans adjusts his glasses. Your ducts create turbulent airflow. They violate aerodynamic cooling principles. According to our models, they reduce total airflow by 8%. Tony replies quietly, maybe. But the rear cylinders ran 60 degrees cooler. Evans frowns. Probably an instrument error. The thermocouples may have been misaligned after your modification. Tony opens his duffel and slides a logbook across the table. Ran 3 more tests, sir. Different thermocouples. Same results, 50 to 60 degrees cooler every time. A Boeing engineer leans forward. Even if your data is accurate, Sergeant, these hand-built ducts are completely impractical for production. We can't tool up for something like this across the entire fleet. Tony looks confused. Why not? They're just aluminum tubes. Because they're not engineered. Another engineer snaps. No stress analysis. No vibration testing. You're playing with $35,000 engines. We can't let every mechanic start freelancing. The room hums with condescension. Men who've spent 20 years designing engines are now lecturing a plumber. Tony stays silent, hands folded. Then, Colonel LeMay stands up. Gentlemen, he says, his voice low and steady, shut up. The room freezes. LeMay looks at Tony. Sergeant, I've got bombers burning up on Saipan. Crews refusing to fly because they're more afraid of their own engines than of Japanese guns. Now you're telling me you can fix that with some aluminum tubes? Yes, sir. And these men, LeMay gestures toward the engineers, are telling me it can't work because it's not properly engineered. Is that about right? Evans hesitates. Yes, Colonel, but how long have you been working on this cooling problem? LeMay cuts in. Since early 1943. About 20 months. And what have you accomplished? Incremental improvements. Minor adjustments too. Has any of it worked? Silence. LeMay slams the temperature logs onto the table. This man achieved a 60-degree reduction with scrap metal and common sense. You've had 20 months and millions of dollars. He's had 3 nights and a toolbox. Guess who's winning? No one speaks. Here's what's going to happen, LeMay continues. You're going to take Sergeant Validore's modification. You're going to engineer it properly. Stress tests, vibration analysis, all of it. And you're going to get it into production. Not in 20 months, not in 20 weeks, in 20 days. Evans blinks. Colonel, that's impossible. Then you'd better start working faster, LeMay growls. Because in 30 days I'm bombing Japan with 500 B-29 seconds, and I need engines that don't burn over the Pacific. He turns back to Tony. Sergeant, you'll stay here at Wright Field as a technical consultant. These men are going to have questions. You'll answer them, and don't let them overcomplicate it. Tony nods. still stunned. "Yes, sir." LeMay heads for the door, then pauses. Sometimes the best fix isn't in the manuals. Sometimes it's in the hands that hold the wrench. The door closes behind him. The engineers stare at Tony. The room that once mocked him is now silent. For the first time, the man who spent his life fixing pipes in Cleveland realizes what's about to happen. His simple idea, his plumbing fix, might just save the most advanced airplane in the world. October 15th, 1944. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The testing bay smells of hot oil, fuel vapors, and anticipation. A modified R3350 engine, Tony's engine, sits mounted inside a reinforced steel test cell. Its silver casing gleams under harsh arc lights. Rows of sensors, thermocouples, and pressure gauges bristle from its sides like needles. This is no ordinary test. It's the most rigorous engine evaluation in the history of American aviation. Tony stands behind the glass observation wall, his heart hammering. On the other side, engineers from Wright Aeronautical and NACA swarm like surgeons around a patient. They've taken his crude, hand-built ducts and re-engineered them to military precision. Every dimension is logged, every joint stress-tested, but the design, the idea, remains his. Test run Alpha, starting at 0900 hours. A voice calls over the intercom. "Full power. 2-hour endurance. Let's see if your plumber's miracle holds up." The engine roars to life. At idle, it's a deep metallic growl. As the throttle advances, it becomes a hurricane, a deafening wall of sound that rattles the viewing glass. Tony grips the railing. He knows this drill. He's watched engines fail before. He knows how long it takes. 90 seconds. That's when the rear cylinder temps usually spike past 550 degrees. At 100 seconds, the oil pressure begins to waver. At 2 minutes, magnesium ignites, and the engine turns into a blowtorch. But not today. 2 minutes pass. Then 5. Then 10. The gauges hold steady front cylinders at 415 degrees, rear cylinders at 440. Still climbing, but slowly. Controlled, balanced. Doctor. Evans stares at the monitor, lips tight. "Increase power 10%, he orders. The test operator hesitates. "Sir, that'll exceed rated limits." "Do it." The throttle slides forward. The R3350 howls like a living thing, prop shaft blurring into a silver disc. The room trembles. Tony barely breathes. 30 minutes. 60. 120 minutes, twice as long as any B-29 has ever maintained full power in flight. The readings remain stable. Rear cylinders 478 degrees, front 415. No valve failures, no detonation, no heat cracks, nothing. "Doctor." Evans runs the numbers 3 times. He turns to Tony. "You're moving 8% less air and running 120 degrees cooler. That's impossible." Tony smiles faintly. "It's not how much air you move, sir. It's where you move it. The test ends after 3 hours, a record endurance run. When the engine finally winds down, the techs crowd around it. The rear cylinders look brand new, no heat warping, no discoloration. Tony's plumbing fix has survived everything the engineers could throw at it." Evans approaches him, shaking his head. "Do you even realize what you've done, Sergeant? You've rewritten the airflow map of this engine." Tony shrugs. "I just gave the air a better path." On October 28, 1944, Colonel LeMay signs the emergency directive. Boeing is to incorporate the Validore bypass cooling system, or Tony ducts, as the crews will call them, into all production B-29 seconds immediately. By November 15th, the first wave of aircraft equipped with Tony's modification rolls off the line, and 2 weeks later, those bombers carrying the quiet fingerprints of a plumber from Cleveland head west. Their destination, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Their mission, Tokyo. For the first time, the engines that once burned themselves alive are ready to face the ultimate test combat. November 24th, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The tropical air is thick with humidity and the smell of aviation fuel. Mechanics in sweat-stained uniforms move like clockwork across the airfield, preparing for a mission that will test everything Tony Validore's invention stands for. The target, the Musashino Aircraft Plant, near Tokyo, Japan's most vital war production facility. Distance, 3,000 miles round trip. Duration, 9 hours of sustained high power. The ultimate torture test for the R-3350. Captain Robert Fitzgerald climbs aboard the B-29 City of Los Angeles. His flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Mike Romano, checks his clipboard twice. He's flown this route before and lost engines every single time. They taxi down the strip as the tropical dawn rises. 4 massive propellers spin up to full roar. The plane lurches forward. Romano watches the gauges like a hawk. Rear cylinder temperatures 438 degrees. Fronts 421, perfect symmetry. He frowns. "Captain, I think the temp gauge is busted." "Why?" Fitzgerald shouts over the engine noise. "It's not climbing. It's too steady." 2 hours into the flight, Romano keeps checking. Still steady. The number 3 engine, the same position that always overheated, runs cooler than the rest. By the time they reach Tokyo, he's convinced it's not the gauge, it's the ducts. They complete the bombing run and return to Saipan after 9 straight hours, at altitude the longest, hardest mission ever flown by a B-29. When they land, Romano pops the cowling open and stares at the metal. The rear cylinders are still silver, clean, no burn marks, no discoloration. He finds the crew chief and asks, "What's different about number 3? "New mod from stateside. Some mechanic invented it. They're calling him Tony Ducts." Over the next 3 weeks, mission data pours in from across the Pacific. Before the modification, in September and October, 4.2 engine fires per 100 flight hours. 18% of missions aborted due to overheating. 22 bombers lost every month, mostly to their own engines. After the modification, December through February, 0.7 engine fires per 100 flight hours, 3% of missions aborted. 4 bombers lost per month, an 83% drop in engine-related disasters. By March 1945, more than 2,000 B-29 seconds have been retrofitted with Tony's ducts. The results are staggering. Not only does reliability skyrocket, strategy changes. Before, missions were limited by distance and engine risk. Now, bombers can reach deep into Japan, Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo itself. They fly higher, longer, and heavier than ever before. LeMay's air strategy, the round-the-clock firebombing that cripples Japan's industry, becomes possible only because those engines stay alive. Every landmark moment of the Pacific Air War, from the night raids on Tokyo to the atomic missions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, rides on engines that don't fail. Engines cooled by the quiet genius of a plumber. And across the ocean, the Japanese notice. After the war, captured Imperial Japanese Army documents reveal their shock. Lieutenant General Torishiro Kawabe, Deputy Chief of Staff, wrote, "In autumn 1944, we believed the B-29 program was collapsing. Their engines were unreliable. We expected their losses to end the bombing. But in December, something changed. The B-29 seconds came in greater numbers. They flew longer missions. Their engines did not fail. We realized then we had lost the air war." Even Japanese ace Saburo Sakai would later recall, "We feared the B-29, not for its guns, but for its endurance." Early in the war, we saw them lose engines and fall behind. After December 1944, they flew in perfect formation for hours. Their engines never stopped. We knew we could not win against such machines. By the spring of 1945, American crews give the aircraft a new nickname, the Plumber's Fortress. They don't know Tony's full story. They just know that their engines no longer betray them. They trust the ducts. They trust the flow. From the frozen skies over Tokyo to the smoldering ruins of the war's final battles, Tony Validore's idea carries them home quietly, faithfully, invisibly. June 1945. The war in Europe is over. Japan is breaking. At Wright Field in Dayton, Sergeant Antonio Tony Validore is packing his duffel bag, preparing to go home. The same man who once fixed leaky pipes in Cleveland basements has just helped save the most expensive aircraft program in American history. An officer hands him a crisp envelope. Inside is the Army Commendation Medal awarded for technical innovation that significantly contributed to the war effort. Tony stares at it, silent for a moment. Then he shakes his head. "I didn't do anything special, sir. I just fixed a cooling problem. That's what mechanics do." The colonel insists, "Sergeant, your modification saved over 200 aircraft and thousands of airmen." Tony looks down at his oil-stained hands and says softly, "Then give the medal to the ones who flew them. They're the heroes. I just ran some pipes." He leaves the medal on the desk and walks out. Back in Cleveland, Tony returns to his quiet life. The war ends and the noise fades. He goes back to plumbing, fixing leaky faucets, installing heating lines, crawling under floors again. He never mentions the B-29 to his customers, not once. To them, he's just Tony, the plumber, the guy who always shows up on time and gets the job done. In 1947, a local reporter from the Cleveland plane dealer tracks him down after hearing rumors about the mechanic who saved the Superfortress. Tony refuses an interview. "I don't want publicity," he says. "I did my job. That's all there is to it." The paper runs the story anyway, buried on page 7. Cleveland plumbers. Simple idea. Solved B-29 crisis. Few people notice. Fewer remember. But the engineers do. Wright Aeronautical quietly codifies Tony's bypass design as the Validore cooling system. The principle-directed flow cooling becomes standard in every air-cooled engine that follows. Modern turbojet and turbofan engines still rely on the same concept, guiding airflow through targeted ducts to control heat distribution. The F-35 Lightning II, the GE-9X that powers Boeing's 777X, even NASA's spacecraft thermal loops, all use advanced descendants of Tony's idea, not by name, never by credit, but by principle. Because Tony's lesson was simple. Flow takes the path of least resistance. If it's not going where you need it, build a better path. 1982, Cleveland. Tony Validore dies quietly at 76, still working part-time as a plumber. His obituary mentions his wartime service as an aircraft mechanic, nothing more. No medals, no fanfare. No mention of the thousands of lives his idea saved. At his funeral, the church is half full. Family, neighbors, a few men from the plumbing union, and one stranger. A man in his 60s, with a weathered face and the posture of someone who once flew through fire. After the service, he approaches Tony's son. "I flew B-29 seconds in the Pacific," he says. 35 missions. My crew made it home because our engines didn't catch fire. I've spent 40 years trying to find the man who invented those ducts. I wanted to thank him. Tony's son blinks in confusion. "My father never said anything about inventing anything. He just said he fixed engines." The veteran smiles faintly. "That sounds like the kind of man who'd save 2,000 lives and never think it was a big deal. History forgot his name." But every plane that flies today, every pilot who returns safely from the sky, carries a trace of Tony Validore's mind inside its engines. Not the engineer's brilliance, not the officer's authority, but the craftsman's instinct to look at chaos and find a way for things to flow again. In a war built on destruction, Tony's genius was creation. He didn't design a weapon. He saved one. And in doing so, he gave the B-29 and the men who flew it something more powerful than firepower. He gave them endurance. He gave them life. Sometimes history's greatest victories don't come from generals or scientists. They come from someone who understands the simple truth that makes everything work, whether it's water, air, or the will to keep going. If you want it to reach the right place, you build it a better path.